Today we're talking to Val Dubik, and I'm Megan Sweary. I work at the Papa John Center here at Iowa State. So we help businesses to start business. We help students start businesses, and we're doing these sessions as a resource for community members, students, etc., to hopefully help you get started. So today we're talking all about time management, as you hopefully know. And next week, we're also going to talk about the basics of getting started. So licensing and trademarking and all of that stuff that can be really intimidating to help you understand what needs to be done and maybe what you can wait on. And then we're also going to talk about pricing and sales, and then have a panel asking what people wish they knew before they had gotten started. So with that, we'll go ahead and hop into today's session. So first, let's just get to know Val a little bit. Val, can you tell us about your entrepreneurial experience, kind of where you started and where you are now?
Yeah, so I actually started at Iowa State. I was a photographer at the Iowa State Daily, and they gave me like a 5-minute lesson for how to use a camera on a like a torn piece of paper, and then literally sent me off to my first assignment. So thanks to Iowa State, though, that's what got me into business, because I started in photography, then it turned into a business, and did wedding photography for 10 years, and then moved into business coaching because I just ended up realizing that the business side of creative business especially was something I was really passionate about. And so I just ended up making that full pivot after 10 years.
That's awesome. And now you help other people, which is very cool. And that's why you're here today, to talk to us. So before we hop into time management content, first I want to know who has trouble with productivity or time management. If you can use like the reactions and raise your hand or give us a little clap or something just to say, yep, that's me. Seeing some people pop in. Yeah, it's a pretty common issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so Val, how can we be better?
Well, I think before we fully get into all of the details, it's good to talk a little bit about just why time management is important. So time management and productivity in general, they're not typically the most sexy business topic. It's not like social media marketing that everybody wants to learn about. And I think part of that is because it doesn't have an obvious, quick financial return on investment. But honestly, I believe it's probably the thing holding most of us back from hitting our big goals. So even in the word, we see that time needs to be managed. So the hard truth is that only you can manage your time, and we need to take that responsibility seriously as business owners. So, okay, we're going to do the raise hands thing again. So let me know how many of you became or are interested in becoming an entrepreneur because you were hoping to have more time or more flexibility. Anybody? Yep. Me too. But it's just like the classic, like everybody wants to be their own boss, right? And so many people become entrepreneurs because they want to have that time. They want to have flexibility. And from the outside looking in, it seems like entrepreneurs are living the dream. But then I hear the same stories over and over again of, I quit my 9 to 5, but now I work 24/7 and all I do is answer emails. But this doesn't have to be your reality. So I don't know about you all, but I love a good personality test. And I think they're so helpful, but I do think that sometimes our cultural obsession with personality labels can tend to lean on those labels and allow them to hold us back. So instead, I want to challenge you to study and learn to understand your personality so that you can manage your time in a way that's going to work for you. So that means we don't just say, oh, I'm a P on the Myers-Briggs, so I can't time block, or I'm a creative, so I can only create when I'm in the mood. We need to figure out how we can be productive despite our personality. And part of that is we just need to come to terms with the fact that if we want to succeed as an entrepreneur, we actually have to get some things done, right? So to do that and not burn out, we need to learn to manage our time. As an entrepreneur, and especially as a creative, it's essential that you recognize and protect your brain space. When the brain is bogged down with a bunch of things, it has a harder time being creative. And this is a really big deal because you need to be able to problem solve and be creative to do your job. And so even those that aren't necessarily running a business, whatever job you have, if you have to problem solve and be creative, this is really important. I think it's also important to just recognize and admit that we're human. And a lot of productivity comes back to realizing that you can do it all. You can't do it all. You can't do it all, but you can do more than you think. And so we need to come to terms with our limitations and build systems and processes around those limitations to maximize the time that we do have. We often have really unrealistic expectations of ourselves, and it's a little bit of reverse psychology because you would think that admitting you have less time means you would get less done, but it's actually the opposite. When you're realistic about your time, you don't try to pack too much into it, and then you might actually get some of those things done. So we need to get things out of our head and stop trying to retain and remember everything on our own. So even if you're really good at remembering things, imagine what you could do with your brain if it wasn't being required to keep track of every single little detail. I mean, just thinking about even your computer, you know that the more things you have on it, the slower it's going to get. So whether or not you're really great at remembering everything, it's not really a badge of honor. It's about making the most of our capacity. So how do we make the most of our capacity? Well, we're going to start with some of my top principles of productivity, and then we'll get a little bit more practical. So number one, time is a precious resource. We have such a limited amount of time, and I think we especially really feel that in our culture. But in order to spend our time on what matters most, we need to take ownership of our time. So number two, time management and productivity are like a muscle. It's not going to be a quick fix. It is something that you have to grow in, be consistent, keep working on it. It's literally the same as going to the gym to get stronger or whatever your goal is. You can't just go once and be great at it. You're not going to know how to use every machine. You're not going to overnight become ripped. You have to be consistent, grow, and keep working on it. And the other thing about that is that when you first start working on it, it's going to be painful. You almost positively have developed bad habits. I have, and that's going to need to be broken down and rebuilt into good habits and routines. So I kind of mentioned this already, but we need to, for number three, take ownership of our time and productivity. So we really need to stop making excuses for why things happen to us and start accepting responsibility for our time. Now, this is not without grace. I don't want you to feel guilty, but rather I just want you to allow yourself to regain control of what you spend your time on. Ultimately, you need to know that if you don't tell your time what it would be filled with, it's going to fill itself, and only you can decide to change that cycle. So number four, one thing at a time. The most efficient way to work is to focus on one thing at a time. There have been actual studies that show that multitasking is not actually real. What you're actually doing is bouncing from topic to topic. And so your brain isn't actually thinking about multiple things at a time. And so we need to utilize that and actually allow ourselves to focus in hard on the one thing at a time, finish that thing, and then move on. Then, first things first. So, spoiler alert, we need to do the most important things first. And usually that's not going to be social media or all of the things that make us feel that just feel urgent or feel like we really need to do them. So if we're doing everything in our business and the to-do list just never ends, we're often going to sit down and immediately feel overwhelmed and discouraged about the super long to-do list. And so we end up doing the easiest or loudest thing first. So we answer emails, we reply to comments on Instagram, but then the back end of our business never actually gets cleaned up. And eventually that's going to catch up with us. So we need to start prioritizing the right things and making the hard things a priority too. Clients, of course, need to be a top priority, but we need to learn to manage our time in a way that also allows us to do other things. I think a really important piece to all of this, which I've already touched on a little bit, is number 6, we need to know ourselves and set ourselves up for success. So like I was saying before, pay attention to your habits, your personality, what helps you to be productive. Try different things. Don't assume that something isn't going to work unless you've tried it. You know, maybe if classical music playing in the background while you write content works for you, do that. If you work best in a busy coffee shop atmosphere, do that. If you work best at 5 a.m., yikes, but do it. I actually have a client who does this, and I have actually done it a time or two myself. But the idea is just to pay attention to when you are working best, what the environment is like, and try to duplicate that as often as possible. So number 7, we want to ruthlessly eliminate distractions. It's really important that we admit that we're going to be more productive and do better work if we actually focus on that one thing at a time. And that means shutting off the distractions. So don't want to call anybody out, but this means things like Netflix in the background or notifications popping up all the time, a billion tabs, always listening to a podcast, or doing your house chores when you should actually be working on your business. All of these things just distract us from doing the things that we really need to do. And the thing about them is we are making that choice. So we need to make the choice to eliminate those distractions so we can get the right things done. Okay, so the last one is to limit your educational inputs. So we are in the information age with so much content readily available at our fingertips, but we can overdo it. If you're constantly listening to another podcast about another topic, you probably need to cut back and focus what you're learning and what your inputs are. So thinking back to brain space, decide what you're working on, improving in your business, and listen and learn only about that one thing at a time. So figure out what your goal, like your next goal is, how you want to grow, and really hone in all of your educational inputs to those topics so that you're not constantly bouncing all over the place thinking you need to do the other 5 billion things that the world is telling you to do. All right, so we're going to get a little bit more practical now. Those are the principles that I think are really important to come back to and remind yourself of. But now I would like to show you all a list system and time blocking process that I use and that I teach my clients to use, and is it's not so rigid that you can't tweak it to work for you, but just kind of the baseline of how this system works is likely going to be really helpful in just getting more done and getting the right things done. So I want to ask you to trust the process. Time blocking is honestly probably one of the most resisted habits to build that most of my clients say they wish they would have stuck to sooner, even type B clients. So you don't have to be type A to time block. So it's not going to feel easy or natural at first, but don't write it off and trust the process. So the list system. The first thing we need to do is pick an app and stick to it. So all of your lists need to be in one place. So this could be Asana, this could be even as simple as the Apple Reminders app on your phone and computer that comes with it. There's Trello, and I think Monday is a new one that I've heard of. There are a lot of apps, but the main idea is that you need to have one place where you have all of your lists. So no more sticky notes here, 5 notebooks there, 10 different notes in your notes app. Like, I mean, the notes app could technically maybe be your list home base, but an actual list system would probably be a better idea. Okay, now that we know that, we're just going to talk through the different lists. So the first one is your project list. This is going to be anything that takes more than 30 minutes. If it's a couple of hours, it's definitely a project. If there's several steps within that project, usually it's a project. You're going to be much less effective when you only give 30 minutes to an hour here or there to a project. So the idea is for project time to be bigger chunks of time. The task list is anything that you can get done in less than 30 minutes. Most of the time tasks are closer to like 5 to 10 minutes. This could be something like answering an email, gathering quick information, posting to social media. Anytime you think about a task, any of those little just quick tasks that you have to do, you want to put that in your task list. So I literally put things like reply to Alex's reply to Alex's text on my task list. Say that 10 times really fast. So little things like replying to a text or giving someone a call, just every little thing you want to be committed to putting all of it on that list. So then we have our projects and our tasks. Those are like your master lists. Those are the lists that you always keep adding to anytime you know of something else that you need to do. But the magic comes in more in the weekly to-do list. So this is where you're going to have all of your tasks and your projects that you want or need to complete for that week only. The reason this is magic is that we are focusing only on the things that we have determined are most important. And by doing that ahead of time, so before you're in the moment, you're going to see more realistically, you're going to be able to think more realistically about what is actually most important. Because when you're in the moment, you're going to feel the tug to do the things that are loud and feel really urgent. But if you can make those decisions ahead of time, create your weekly to-do list, and then only look at that, then that helps reduce the overwhelm. Because if you were to look only at your master list where there's 100 things that you're feeling like you're never making a dent, then it's just going to be discouraging. And again, it's going to distract your brain because you're going to see all these other things that you feel like you really should get done. But you're making the decision at the end of the week before or at the very beginning of the week that these are the things you're doing that week. That's what's on your weekly to-do list. And that is honestly, I think that was the most life-changing for me when I started doing this, because I felt a lot of guilt and overwhelm when I looked at the really long list. So in addition to the weekly list and the projects and tasks, we also want to have a backburner list. These are going to be the projects and tasks that you would like to get to someday, but are not currently really important or urgent. But you don't want to forget them either. So they're still important to you, but not really urgent or not something you can focus on right now. And the reason you would have a backburner list is to also, again, kind of reduce the distraction and overwhelm when you are looking at your master lists, because you're looking at those master lists every week when you're populating your weekly to-do list. And so if those are even super, super long, and if they're not all things that are realistic for you to get to soon, then again, there's just more of that overwhelm and guilt that can come. So anything that you know is not something you can get to right now or even very soon, put it on the back burner. All right, so your recurring list is going to be the tasks that happen on a regular basis. So once a quarter, paying sales tax or paying your quarterly tax estimates. That is always going to happen. And so you can have that on a recurring list. There's also even some things that you might do weekly, like categorizing transactions or doing like your financial routine. There's a lot of things that we do over and over again, and you can have that on a recurring list so that they don't permanently live on your weekly list, kind of cluttering that view. So I'm going to show you now just some examples of what those lists might look like. So the project list, this is just an example of what some of those projects might be. Obviously, there's a huge range of what these could be, but just some examples of like writing a longer email that's something that's more marketing related, or creating a PDF, even things like you see on there, figure out auto payments. Like, make that a project because you don't know how long that's going to take. And it's like research. And so it's probably not going to be something you'll be able to figure out in like a couple minutes. So that's just an example, and you guys will have these slides if you want to look back at them again, but that's an example of projects. Tasks, it just shows that these are like kind of quicker, short tasks that really aren't going to take a whole lot of time. Then the weekly to-do list, this is how I set mine up. I have categories of projects, tasks, and then I personally do include personal and errands. And that is just because for me, it was really a lot easier for me to keep track of everything that I needed to do in a week, instead of having to flip between two different lists. But that's a personality thing. So you may determine that you want to have a completely separate personal to-do list. What I like about, so this is Apple Reminders. That's what this app is that I'm showing you screenshots of. I can actually collapse those categories. So when I'm in my workday, I collapse the personal and the errands. Just again, to keep myself from seeing those things and being distracted by them. Okay, so Backburner, I think often education things might be on Backburner, or I mean, something like redo your office space, like if you want to redecorate it. That's just a couple examples of what might be on there. So then recurring, you've got just a lot of kind of typical recurring tasks that you'd have, like logging mileage, paying your sales tax, like I mentioned before. But again, this is going to be a little bit different for everybody. Okay, so just to review, we've got projects, usually more than 30 minutes, tasks, usually less than 30 minutes, weekly to-do list, Backburner, and recurring. Now, these don't need to be the only list that you have, but I do think that having these 5 lists makes a big difference in your process for prioritizing the right things. All right, so now that we have the list system, then we can put those things into time blocks. So time blocking is a way to plan your week where you assign specific work or tasks to specific blocks of time during your day. The less you have to make decisions about what to do next, the more you're going to get done and the less stressed you will be. And the time it takes you just to decide what to do, and the time that you'll waste scrolling email, Instagram, Facebook, all of those things drastically lower your productivity, and they just eat up your time. Even if it's just a couple minutes here, a couple minutes there, we know, you know, that time just disappears, and all of a sudden 30 seconds turns into 30 minutes and you've been scrolling Instagram for that long. So even when your hours are variable, and I would actually say especially when your hours are variable and few, you need to decide ahead of time what you're going to be working on and what you're going to do that during that time. Now, this implies that you have work hours to some extent. And I know that there are some scenarios where you may need to have a plan for how you would adjust if things do change in your schedule often, but the main idea is for when you sit down, you know that this is at the top of the list and this is the thing I need to work on, and this is how long I think it's going to take. time blocking can kind of end up being like your boss. So you can let your calendar be your manager. I think as a lot of entrepreneurs are solopreneurs. And so unlike a typical job, we don't always have someone looking over our shoulder or checking in on us to see if we're on track to meet our deadlines. And so this is a really helpful way to kind of impose a boss into your life to some extent. So let your calendar be your manager. Okay, so let's talk about the actual how-to step-by-step of time blocking. Number one, we need to estimate how long each item on our weekly to-do list is going to take us. And this is, I will just be honest with you, this is where most people are the worst, and myself included. It is really hard initially to estimate your time accurately. So give yourself grace and remember, this is a muscle. You have to grow in this. You're going to get better at it, but do your best and always estimate high. Don't think like best case scenario, think worst case scenario for how long something is going to take. So once you've done that, then you want to time block your lunch breaks and anything personal that's going to affect your work time. We want to get those things on there so that it's not a surprise and we're not forgetting about them. And personally, I like to block them in a different color. So my lunch break and anything personal, that's a different color than my work. All right, so then once you've done that, you will create the time blocks on a digital calendar for each item. So I personally think that it's ultimately going to be best to use a digital calendar. Some people do time block on a paper calendar, but for me personally, I ended up feeling a lot of guilt and just frustration with having to like erase or cross things off. And I mean, if you're anything like me, you like things to look nice. And so it's just really annoying and discouraging when you have to cross things off and move them around. So the ease of tweaking and editing a digital calendar is just so great. And it's also just practical. You are going to have to make changes. Like we have to know that we will have to tweak our time blocks. Like it's just how life works. Not everything is going to go according to plan. So that's my pitch for the digital calendar. So if anything doesn't fit into the hours that you've allotted, so looking at your work hours and all of the things you put on your weekly list, if not everything fits, then you have to make the decision to either move that thing to the next week, or you need to intentionally add extra work hours to this week if you have to get it done. So this is kind of just the hard truth. I am very, very big on work-life balance. And I think that we need to be like actively really working to take the time off that we need and to close our computers at night. But if you are in a situation where there's nothing you can do about it and you have to get something done, make sure it's intentional. Make the decision. Decide Wednesday night, I'm adding extra work hours. I'm not going to work every single night, but just that night, I'm going to add it for this week just because I have to get this thing done. Okay, so here is just a visual example of, so there's the weekly to-do list that we already saw, and then there's the time blocks on the right. So you'll notice that there's lunch breaks. You'll notice that also there's buffer space. So I think it's really important that you don't schedule every single second. You need to have some flexibility in your time so that you are prepared for when things go wrong, because they will. And then the other really important thing that you can notice here is that there's a specific block for tasks. So the magic of the task list compared to the project list is that you do your tasks together. So you have like an hour and you're just like boom, 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 checking them off the list. And the reason that that works really well is you don't have to get into like a deep flow usually when you're doing a task. It's usually somewhat brainless or fairly easy to do. So if you can just check all of those things off within 1 hour, you're going to be much more efficient at getting those things done. And then they are not falling in between your project time, which just, distracts and kind of takes your brain all over the place when you really need to be focused. Okay. Yeah, and this also just shows an example. I didn't show you in this specific image the different colors, but I do really recommend that anything personal or breaks be a different color, because I think it just helps visually change our thought process and our focus, and just like the brain space that we're in at that point. Okay, so a couple pro tips for time blocking. I already said this, but can't say it enough. Always, always, always estimate high for how long something will take. Think worst case scenario, not best case scenario. Don't schedule every single minute. Leave some breathing room and allow also for transition time. So if you're going from one project to another project, you might need a couple minutes to just kind of take a breather and get your mind in the right headspace. You also want to make sure that you are allowing for travel time. It's really easy to get through all of your time blocks and think you have an hour for something, but you actually have to leave the last like 15 minutes of that hour to get to your next thing. So allow for that travel time, and then also make sure that you are time blocking and limiting your email and social media time. Don't always wait for creativity to flow. Sometimes you're just going to have to push through the mindset blocks that we get into to get into a flow. Be okay with a crappy first draft. We have to, it's so funny. I think we think that like professional authors like just write an amazing book and they write it perfectly as they go. But actually they always start with a pretty crappy first draft. And so we need to learn to be okay with that with everything that we're doing. And doing that and being okay with that allows us to get into the work and get our brain transitioned to really thinking about that. All right, so often people ask, okay, well, what do I do if my time block doesn't work, or if something took longer than I expected, or, it's a very common issue, and you will encounter this, and probably if not weekly, at least every other week, you're going to have something that just doesn't go as you planned. So if that happens, you need to update your time block after the fact so that you can look back and better estimate how long something will take. If you skip a block or you don't finish something, you have to move that block or put it back on your list so that you schedule it for the next week or whenever it needs to get done. All of this really helps reduce guilt. And this is something that I've already mentioned, but that I struggle with. Taking control of your time and making the decision to change your time blocks and not just letting those things happen to you is really going to help reduce the guilt that can come with just not getting something done. And I know I keep saying this, but we have to see it as a process. You're constantly going to be learning and growing in your ability to time block and to actually stick to it and to get the time estimates right. So it's important to remember that we are probably going to fall off the bandwagon at some point. Not probably, you will. It's important to remember that and to remind ourselves over and over, it's a learning process. We might think initially that it's not going to work for us or it doesn't fit our personality, but you really have to give it a true shot and be willing to tweak and test the process as you go to make it work for you. So take the principles and the basics of time blocking and make them work for your personality and your life. And remember that systems like this need flexibility. It has to be a balance. You can't be so rigid that there's no room for real life to happen. So trust the process, keep struggling, keep moving forward. as with everything in business, it is going to take work. It's not going to be work that immediately results in a clear dollar amount, but it will affect your bottom line, because when you focus on your time in the right ways, you will hold to your deadlines and you will make space to work both in and on your business, which ultimately improves your bottom line. All right, now that we know how to manage our lists and how to time block, I want to quickly touch on some of the tactics that are going to make your life easier and free up some time and brain space. I call these work smarter, not harder tactics. And I also just want to mention, like, if you guys have had any questions as we've been going about the time blocking in the list system, please just drop them in the chat, and we are going to get to some questions at the end. So now that like we've whipped through all of that new information, if you need to take a second to just put some of those in the chat, go ahead and do that. But we're gonna keep moving just because I want you guys to get all of the information, and you will get the slides and some of the cliff notes later too. So, all right, work smarter, not harder. So you've heard that quippy phrase, you see it all the time, but what does it actually mean? You're going to work smarter through tactics like workflows, systems, routines, and the like. So we're going to start with routines. Routines are like automation. When you have a routine, it becomes so second nature that it becomes automatic. You don't have to think, you just do. The idea is to not use your mental energy on the insignificant decisions. So some of you may know this, but I love the fact that Steve Jobs literally wore basically the same thing every single day because it wasn't important to him and he didn't want to waste mental energy picking outfits. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm 100% positive I have wasted a lot of energy and time staring at my closet and maybe changing a couple times. It's just, there are things that would really be helpful if we just made them into a routine so that we didn't have to think as much about it. So figure out what you need to do on a regular basis and put that into a routine. What is going to help you be productive? What is going to help you be creative when you need to be? Sarah Blakely, she is the inventor of Spanx. She actually created a fake morning commute because she does her best thinking and ideating in the car. So her office was really close to where she lived. It wouldn't have been enough time for her to really have that like car thinking time. And so she just created a routine of going on a fake commute to get to her office because she knew that that helped her. So figure out what those things are for you and create a routine around it. Batch work. All right, so the idea is to get into the right mindset and then maximize the flow. So you'll be able to get into a groove of that kind of work, whatever it is you're doing, if it's writing captions or writing blog posts. A lot of times batch work can be, it's often content related, but I mean, you can batch a lot of different things, but you'll get into the groove with that kind of work, and then you can knock out more at a time and save more time by doing them together than if you had done them separately. So a couple examples would be social media posts, video recording, blogging. There's a lot of options, but those are just a few to get you thinking. So find the things that you can batch and do it. All right, so workflows, I think is kind of a little bit of an elusive concept. And so I think it's important to actually define what a workflow actually is. So a workflow is a full breakdown of every single step, every part of the process that you take in your product or service. So that's going to be every email, every piece of collateral, every contact touch point, every single task on your part. So the idea here is to do the same thing every time to provide a consistent and quality experience. This is both a benefit to you and your client. So it is It's more efficient for you. It saves brain space for you. It takes the guesswork and thinking out of the process for you. But then also every client is getting an intentional and quality experience. So tangibly, a workflow at minimum would be like a bulleted list in a Google Doc. Better than that would be a spreadsheet where you could like actually check things off. But the best case scenario would be to have your workflows in a system that's a CRM, like Dubsado, 17 Hats. There's a lot out there, but those are just a couple examples. But systems like that are going to allow you to automate things and just really make the process as efficient as possible. So I think it's interesting that a lot of times we have issues and frustrations in our experience working with people, or just on our like back end of what we're doing in our work. But those often can actually be solved by adjusting your workflow. So when an issue or an irritation or frustration comes up, stop and ask yourself, is there a solution in adding something to my workflow or adding something to my client experience content? So an example of that would be like a how-to PDF. So let's just say you do Zoom calls with people and people always get confused and frustrated using Zoom. Create something for them that's going to teach them how to use it and to make it as simple and easy as possible. So whenever you have those irritations, issues, frustrations, like make sure you take a second to see if there's something you can do to add to your workflow to make that better. Another side benefit to having your workflow set up is that it's actually going to make hiring and expanding your team infinitely easier. If you already have those things set up, training someone else to do that is just going to be a lot easier. So if that's something in your future or a dream of yours, try to get your workflows created before you do that. All right, systems. So I think sometimes we confuse the difference between workflows and systems. So systems are the actual platforms or the applications that you use to manage your workflows in your lists. So you need to find the right apps and the right systems that are going to help keep your life and your business in line. If you have specific apps or systems that you're looking for, and if you want suggestions for those, you guys can drop a question in the chat, and if I know of any that would be helpful, I can give you that recommendation at the end. Okay, so then templates. If you have set it, created it, sent it, or used it more than once, make it a template. There are going to be things that you are going to say and do over and over and over and over again in your business. And so if you are still typing the same email almost daily or weekly, depending on what your client load looks like, you need to create a template for it. And that doesn't mean that it has to be impersonal. So emails, especially, if you have a template, you don't just send them the template without making any changes. But just the time it takes to like be typing out the same thing and also using the brain power to like think of the same things over and over again, just alleviating that, it allows you to think about what matters most. And in those email scenarios, it's usually building a connection with those people. So have a template for the basics, the things you say over and over, but then make sure you have a spot where you are adding personal touches and just making it unique to that person. So some potential templates are going to be emails, questionnaires, invoices, contracts, timelines, presentations, resources, checklists, even handwritten notes. So all of these things, and this probably isn't even all inclusive. There are probably other things you could create templates for, but the idea is to know what the things are that you are doing and saying and creating over and over and make a template out of it. All right, so one of my favorite things is actually creating those supporting resources that are going to educate or support or elevate the experience for your client. So this might be educational videos, it might be PDFs, it might be worksheets, workbooks, checklists. There's a lot of things that this could be, but it's knowing the questions that you're going to be asked and creating something that is going to alleviate that potential strain or frustration. So here's just the list for you. If those are things that you could create that is actually just going to make the experience better, but also be less work for you. So this saves you time by anticipating their questions and any frustrations and making a resource for that. All right, so the last one is automation. If you have a CRM or any apps that help you to do things automatically, do it. It is so helpful, save time, saves brain space, but I definitely want to urge you to not sacrifice all of the personal touch. So this might mean that some of your emails might go out automatically, like contracts, payment reminders, questionnaires, all of that. But you should not, under any circumstances, automate your inquiry response, especially if you're a service provider. I think they're like the product side of things that can really, there can be some automation there, but like if you are doing a service, and especially as a small business, when somebody reaches out to you to inquire about working with you, you want to make that personal. You have a template that you work from as a starting point, but then you need to add the personal connection points and show them that you are a real human who really read their email and really actually cares and wants to work with them as a person and not to just see that as a transaction. It's a relationship. So automate what you can to save time for you and to make your life easier, but don't fully sacrifice all of the personal touch. All right. So in closing, now that we've gone through a million things that you could spend a lot of hours working on, I just want to come back to the heart of it all and remind you that it's more about being ruthless with your time and doing the hard work to build an intentional business that supports your life and not the other way around. Life is never really actually going to slow down until you make it slow down. And all of the things we talked about today are ways to help you do that. They are strategies and principles that you can apply that will allow you to actually run your business in a way that it supports your life and doesn't just drain all of the life out of you. So remember, this is going to be like a muscle. Give yourself grace and don't expect that you can take every little thing you heard today and do it perfectly tomorrow. You can't, you won't. So give yourself time and slowly implement them one at a time. And also feel free to contact me with questions. I personally reply to every email and DM that I get. So yeah, don't be shy. I am all about helping out.
Awesome. Thanks, Val.
Yeah.
So much good information. We do have a couple of questions, and I know we covered a lot in a short period of time today. So if anything came up throughout that time, or you have like an application type question, maybe from this perspective, I'm not a service business, how do I kind of translate that to my time or my job or whatever, feel free to drop them in the chat. We did get one that asked about auto responses, letting people know like how long it would be to hear a response. What are your thoughts on that, Val?
Absolutely. Yes. making it really clear that you're going to respond personally within that time frame, I think is great. And some inquiry forms on websites will automatically take you can have them go to like a thank you page or like an expectations page so that they know that. So you can do it either way. You can have that page that says you can expect to hear with us within this time, or you can have that autoresponder. Yep.
Awesome. What do you hear most commonly is like the hardest thing out of everything you shared today? What do people kind of struggle with the most?
I would say estimating time accurately. I think, man, I would be rich if I got money for every time someone said that they just can't seem to estimate their time accurately. And I think that's why I specifically want to recommend that you go back and adjust your time blocks based on what you actually did. Because then you can look back and say, okay, the last time I wrote a blog post, it took me this long. So I'm going to estimate at least that much time. And just, I think, thinking really critically about what you're doing and why something took longer or why something maybe took less time. Because I think we just kind of keep moving forward and we don't reflect back enough on why things happened the way they did. We can learn a lot from actually reflecting back on those things.
Yeah, I really like that. I feel like we're all just like rushing to then get to the next item and you don't take the time to look back and say, okay, this went well, I could do this a little differently. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
I also really loved how you talked about like when you do time block and you do create systems and lists for yourself and like this is the workflow, it's so much easier to hire. Shameless plug, that is what we covered last week and we talked about that. So that was a really cool parallel that happens like back-to-back weeks.
Yeah.
And for anybody online who wants to hear about building an A-team, that'll be on YouTube. It is on YouTube. And we talked about that last week, but this is kind of where it starts, like being aware of the process that you take so that you can start to outsource that, whether it looks like a full-time person or a part-time person or just a virtual assistant for a certain period of time, contract worker. It kind of all starts here by being aware of what you do and how long things take to get it done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be a nightmare to train someone in something that you don't even know how you do it.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Yes. We got a comment. I love that look back advice. Time management is nothing without analysis. Yeah, I don't think we always think about it that way, but it's true.
And I would say a lot of things in business, we don't take enough time to look back on how they went and analyze. And so, yeah, I think just really getting into a habit of prioritizing in all aspects of business, looking back, seeing what worked, what didn't, and trying to figure out why.
Yeah. I also think that when everything is in one spot like this, you're able to be more honest with yourself about how much you're working in your business versus on your business as like the CEO. And so just another like really helpful tool is like being aware, forcing yourself to be aware.
Yeah, totally.
Jenna, do you have a question? You can go ahead and turn on your mic and stuff if you want to ask one.
Yeah, thank you so much for going through this. I missed a chunk of it because I was trying to be in flow. So I don't remember if I caught like more help for when you're a student and you feel like you're juggling like 3 times the workload of what you're supposed to be juggling, and it just makes it difficult to do anything, and you're constantly chasing people to do work with who don't have the same investments in the work. For example, if you're working on your business and you want to meet with a professor or meet with other students, they don't have the same investment, so they're not putting in the same time and they're not taking a lot of things seriously. Like, how do you juggle just being able to having to move back and forth and nothing really working the way you planned because you're not quite a business owner yet, where you're able to manage those inconsistencies?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think if we're thinking about like the list system and the time blocking, if you can always look at if somebody doesn't follow through or if they back out of a meeting or you know, whatever it might be that happens, when you have the list set up, and I would say prioritized. So personally, I like to have, when I look at my project list, I have the most important thing at the top. And I also have it then in the same order, usually as how I time blocked it. And so even if something falls through, you can move things, you can know, okay, this was the next thing. So I'm going to move that to right now, even though I was supposed to be doing something else at this time. And then, I mean, kind of just the hard reality of less on the time side, but just more on the just hard reality of running a business and other people not valuing things the same way, is to just be persistent and to keep asking, and then to find the people who will show up for you, and kind of just like brush off the ones that don't. But I do think that entrepreneurship, a big part of being successful is just kind of being relentless, like always finding another option, always trying to find another person who you think will fulfill that role or be the resource that you need, and not letting it get you discouraged, because it totally could. And it makes sense. It's really frustrating when people don't value things the way that we do. And especially if that's your time and if you made a plan, but try not to let that keep you from moving forward and finding another option and another solution. Does that help at all?
Thanks. I think it's particularly exhausting because we have a lot of class obligations, and in order to meet those obligations on time, so you can have time to work on your business, you need your team members and everything around that to be on point. But it's just really difficult as a grad student, as a person taking class, and as a person trying to make a business.
Yeah. And I think something else too, just an encouragement, is that it's not going to be this way forever. Like, you're in a really hard season. It's a season though. Like, so there's an end point, assuming you're not going to be in education your whole life. Like, I mean, you could become an educator, but just remembering that it's a season, and to have grace with yourself on the speed of your growth too. And knowing that you might have to go a little bit slower in this season than you would like. I think I said this before, but we just have way too high expectations for ourselves and what we can accomplish in either the time that we have or the season that we're in. And so I think it's also important to really think about your capacity. And that's not just time, but it's also emotional capacity, mental capacity, physical capacity. We need to take those things into account when we are planning out what we're going to do and what our goals are.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, surprisingly, we're at 1 o'clock. Val, thank you so much for always sharing such helpful information and being such a great resource. Val's contact information is here, and her website and stuff is in the slides if you want to go and follow her, get all of her tips. She shares stuff all the time that's super helpful for entrepreneurs. And reach out to any of us here at the Papa John Center anytime. We're happy to help however we can. Next week, like I said, we're going to be talking about kind of the beginning stages of starting a business, and like the things to make you legit that might be kind of overwhelming. So things like naming your business, trademarking, what you can and can't share at certain stages of your business to protect IP, all of that kind of big topic stuff that can be overwhelming. We're going to have the Small Business Development Center here with us to help us walk through. We will answer any other questions that hop in. Yes, there is a recording. It'll be on YouTube, and we'll send an email after this in the next couple days with the slides, the recording, and then Cliff Notes. I will stick on if we have anything else, but if not, thank you all for joining us. And Val, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, of course.